Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn, and I am joined by His Eminence. My husband, Pat. I was thinking of some grandiose way of introducing you, but
I was.
I don't even know why I bothered.
Do we want to start with the review?
You just want to jump right into it? Do you say hello to the people who are listening?
Hello,
you're a fan favorite.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be back on the Catholic Mama.
Glad to be coerced off the couch after the kids are in bed to have a podcast.
This is we tried last night, but I told you it was bedtime.
It was 8:30.
I was right about that, and it is 8:42 right now, so it is past bedtime.
I got my way this time.
So this better be a riveting conversation.
Oh boy. Okay, yes. They all are riveting conversations.
What's the topic?
Well, let's start because you wanted to start off with a review.
That's right. So for people that aren't familiar, I'll give myself a shameless plug. I have my own podcast. It's called The Pat Flynn Show. Wonderful audience, wonderful people, but I've never gotten a review that I've liked so much as the one that somebody was so kind to leave on the Catholic Mama. I don't know if you have it handy.
Oh, I could get it real quick.
But I don't want to spoil it because it was so well done. And I mean this in sincerity. It was a really lovely review. And it's also great, honestly. I want to thank everybody on your behalf who's taken the time to leave a review for this show, because people might not realize this if they don't have a podcast, but reviews really do help. They help. Some technical things. They help with SEO and helping people to find the show. They help the podcast rank, so it will show up for other people if they're searching for things, spiritual things or religious things. So the reviews, one of the best ways you can support the show or any podcast that you like is just taking the time to leave a review. So it really does mean a lot. And so I think it might be nice if occasionally we maybe read some reviews and give some thanks. So what was my favorite one? Do you want to read it?
Yes, this was a really nice review, and thank you to the person who left it. So I have listened to these podcasts over and over, and I really enjoy it when the husband is on. It's nice to hear a couple sharing in their faith. No offense, but you really are great as a team. I would love for him to drop his show and you both do this venture together.
That's
so
my
much
favorite
wisdom.
Part.
I know, we've talked about this. I like this idea, though, that you have to drop what you're doing to support us together. I think that's really nice.
I mean, it's a very sweet review. So thank you so much for taking the time. I'm just curious, why do I have to drop my show?
Maybe we're better on my show.
Am I not very good when I'm by myself? I'd be curious. Or is it just to free up more time to be on your show? Maybe that's it.
Maybe that is it.
Yeah. So.
Well, how we could free up more time is just not to make bedtime 8:30 at night, apparently, when the business stuff has to stop. I don't feel like this is businessy, though. This is fun.
No, it is fun.
This is what the couple who podcasts together stays together.
So what's the topic?
Well, a couple things. I think you wanted it.
I'm ready for bedtime. I'm just trying to.
You're just holding on. You've got your nighty-night tea. He's got so everybody, Pat's drinking sleepy time tea right now and is about to get as lounged as possible on the couch with the microphone.
It's good this isn't a video podcast.
Yeah, no. Well, then they would see the massive toys and fur as well. And if you hear panting in the background, that would be the St. Bernard. Nothing weird.
Before we get into the topic, which I think is faith in the family, right? I really am.
Yes. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to just leave everybody in suspense.
So we went to our first Latin Mass.
Yep.
The other day. That might be new for people or something that a lot of Catholics haven't explored. Do we want to maybe talk about that? The extraordinary form? Because it seems like it might be making something of a resurgence.
Why don't you explain a little bit then? And then we'll talk about our experience.
Yeah, so the extraordinary form was just a way that the Mass was practiced or celebrated, I should say, before the Second Vatican Council. And when they changed the liturgy around, it was quite a shock to a lot of people. Now, this was long before our time as Catholics, long before either of us were even born. But reading into the history has been very interesting, and it doesn't seem like it was ever outlawed, the old form, we could call, or the extraordinary form, which is really just the Latin Mass, the Latin rite.
Many different ways of referring to it. Yeah,
or the Tridentine Mass is another way that you might hear it. And certain parishes have offered it. Sometimes they'll do it just once a month or something like that. But Benedict kind of he lifted the suppression on it, so to speak, where he kind of allowed certain parishes, if they wanted to have a priest trained up in the Latin Mass to offer it. So it seems like it's making something of resurgence, and it has in our area started to pop up in a number of parishes. And then recently they just, I guess, refurbished is the word, an entire parish just for the traditional services. So it will be the traditional Mass forms for daily Mass. So there's a high form, there's a low form of the extraordinary form. The low form is very quiet. The priest says a lot of prayers where you kind of, and we'll get into the details, but the interesting thing, and they just had the first one this Sunday. We didn't go to that one. We went to a different one. Is that from what I understand is that Mass is only the traditional Latin Mass forms. I don't think they offer any of the ordinary forms of what people might expect there. So I'll be curious to see how it goes, and especially as we share some of our impressions with it as well.
Yeah. So when we went, I'm not sure how long the church that we went to, it was about 30 minutes away. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how long they've been doing the Latin Masses there. The priest did say that he was going to keep on keeping on because he hadn't received any direction either way. Right. Nobody told him that he couldn't keep doing it, and nobody had told him that he could. So they were going to keep going. So I'm not sure if this was a relatively new development.
I think he was also responding to St. Mary's because he knew that the other parish was opening up with a Latin Mass.
Right. So which isn't that far. They're not that far apart.
Close. So I think he was concerned with, maybe people just jumping ship or whatever. So, yeah. So we went. I was nervous. Mm-hmm. And I in the past month or so, I bought my first veil, mm-hmm. and I've been wearing it. So I had one on hand to bring with us to the Latin Mass, which isn't a requirement. I mean, there were some women in there without veils. Yeah. So it is very traditional, very like what you think of if you think of anything when you imagine traditional Catholic, that's what the Latin Mass is. So there's, the attire is pretty formal.
Yep.
Which is
even for the young kids.
Yep. Which is difficult for me, who mostly wears gym clothes. So it's good to bring my standard up a little bit. And, the big takeaway, and well, the funny thing is, I'm a Tolkien fan, and he was a big fan of the extraordinary form, the author of the Lord of the Rings series and The Hobbit, so much so that he protested when they changed. So he, reading some of his history was kind of made me originally curious about it. And then I went to a talk not too long ago about a priest who he became an altar server right after the switch to the ordinary form. And he went to go tell his dad, and he said, "Dad, I'm going to be an altar server." And his dad, kind of snidely said, "Oh, you don't know what it even means to be an altar server," referring to how much more demanding it was to be an altar server for the extraordinary form, which I think we saw was the case. Those altar servers did a lot of work.
Yes, those young boys did a lot of speaking in Latin. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were doing the responses. They were leading a lot of it. It was very interesting.
But what this priest said is, well, one, he's fallen in love with the extraordinary form. And the big point that he likes to make, and he doesn't say like it's not this is a better than, or it should be done instead of, or we should go back. But the big takeaway for him, and I think this is probably the same for me too, was he said that the extraordinary form kind of informs the reverence that is sometimes lost in the ordinary form, particularly around the Eucharist, which I completely agree with that. And I guess the big difference, the one thing to note, aside from the fact that the Mass is predominantly in Latin, not all of it.
Right. The homily was English.
Homily is English. But the way that the Eucharist is received is extraordinarily reverent, which is, I would argue, appropriate for what Catholics believe. We believe this really is the body, soul, and divinity of Christ. So it does become a little, what's a word, agitating when somebody goes up there and like kind of grabs the Eucharist out of the priest's hand and like kind of like throws it in the back of his neck,
like a Mentos.
away. And he's like, clearly this guy doesn't even know what's going on. And part of the reason that, this person doesn't know what's going on is because, one, they were probably never taught, but, they think they're just getting something to regulate their blood sugar three-quarters of the way through Mass. But there's also no sign or no great sign of reverence, or at least not as outward a sign of reverence of something really special going on as there is in the extraordinary form.
Right, where you go up to the
altar rail.
The altar rail, you have to kneel down.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I try to go to a weekday Mass as a family with you, because you go almost every day. So we try to go once a week, once every other week. But I hadn't been to an ordinary Mass since we went to the Latin Mass last weekend. And so going into Mass this morning, I felt something greater. Mm-hmm. Of course, now we've been away from our home parish for a couple of weeks and going to different churches. So it felt really nice to be back anyway. But I felt more reverent for it.
Yeah.
The only person in there wearing a veil as well. But, that's another story.
Yeah, might start a little something.
Maybe I'll start a little something.
But yeah, so real quick, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just wanted to, offer some impressions here. And if anybody's curious, I think it's definitely worth going to, if you've never done it before. Absolutely, because the way the Eucharist is received is you go up, you kneel at the altar rail, and the priest feeds you. So you receive the Eucharist right in the mouth. There's no taking it in the hands.
And the priest, again, remember, he is, God is working through him. So the Father is feeding you the Son. Yeah,
it really is a beautiful thing. And the priest who originally gave the talk that I went and saw, he said that, it's a little details that kind of come out in the extraordinary form, these very reverent details that sometimes get lost or overlooked in the ordinary form, even for him as a priest. So he says when he does the extraordinary form, that reverence spills over when he does the ordinary form. And it brings a lot more meaning to him, which he says is there. It's not like that meaning is pulled out, but it's not expressed in the same way, or it's not highlighted is probably a terrible word to what I'm saying. Just go check out an extraordinary form. It's
there should be one in your area.
Yeah.
Maybe even one Sunday a month.
And what
they offer it, and you can bring the kids. We did. It's more challenging. It's quieter. I'm not sure. I'm sure some Latin Masses have music.
Yeah,
ours didn't.
Yeah, that was a low form, and it was. I loved it. I would love, and like I said, I would be cool if, because our parish does not offer it right now. I think it'd be cool if they just did one, a week. I think that would be a nice. I know there's some very hardcore traditionalists who just say we should just go back to the extraordinary form and that's it. I think I like what Benedict said is these are two valid forms of expression, equally valid forms of expression. One can inform and enhance the other. And I like that. I like keeping both of those options open. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And one of my big criticisms of Catholicism over the years was I felt that the Mass was just a bunch of pomp and circumstance. There's incense, there's ringing of the bells, marching in and out with the crucifix. So what is all this stuff? It's meaningless. It's just a bunch of hoo-ha to puff themselves up and make themselves more important or feel more important. So if I had walked into a Latin Mass, at that point, I would have felt even more so. The priest isn't even facing the parishioners. This is bunk.
Yeah.
But I think in general, one of the things that made me Catholic watching the Bishop Barron's Mass. Catholicism series, and he explains the Mass in there so well that I understood it. So I think to know the Mass, to understand the Mass is to love it.
Yeah.
And I think if you understand what is happening, why you're there, why the priest is there, the reverence, you will love the Latin Mass, even if you can't understand it. And when we were in there, plenty of people even had little like Kindles or iPads that they were following along with. They had, or little books that they came, and they had missalettes that
I didn't
had.
see anybody playing Angry Birds or anything.
Nobody was playing Angry Birds, and there were other children there. Ours were not the only, and ours were not the youngest.
Yeah, and it was full. It was full. It was
small church, but it was full.
It was full, a smaller church, but it was full. It was very good. And as somebody who does love the ordinary form, and like you said, when you understand it, to understand it is to fall in love with it, and to just continue to fall in love with it more and more as it just gets richer and more meaningful over time. So I think having that extra form of expression there, those two kind of running side by side, I like that. I like that a lot, and I hope we start to see that the extraordinary form come back again. I think it's a good thing. I know people have been wanting it. I have a few friends that are very, very traditionalists that they will drive hours and hours just to go to the extraordinary form, and that's it. That's the only thing they'll go to. I think I'm with Benedict. I think both are. Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
Good. Switch. All right. Pivot.
All right, and we're done. No, bedtime. No. So one of the things, we've been talking about a lot lately. Us, I mean, my husband and myself, and I think I've been mentioning on Instagram in some cases, or the blog, or on podcasts. And I did an episode on this a while back about being spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. And I have heard, and I know you've heard, over the course of our conversion and us sharing our stories with people, and certainly, I'm pretty sure my parents said it as well. Hey, I don't need religion to be a good person.
Oh, Mother Angelica.
I know
Where are you when we need you?
Mother.
If only I had Mother Angelica as an aunt growing up.
God, that'd be
amazing. I had
amazing.
to go through this nonsense.
She would have set you straight right away. Mm-hmm. So I no thanks, man. You may need it to be a good person, but I don't. And we've heard this, from friends and from strangers on the internet.
Do you need religion to be a good person? Mm-hmm.
So that's one. But also as parents, this is a point that we've talked about, and one that I've really been thinking about, is sure, you might not need it. You could have been raised. So say person A, Mike, Matt, whoever, Steve says, hey man, I don't need religion. I grew up with all this Catholic stuff. I don't need it. Thanks. I'm good. I'm a good person. Well, little does Steve realize that his whole life, if he was raised in a religious setting, his life was infused with morality.
Yeah.
Now that's great. He has, even if he wants to eschew it later, he has that foundation. It is in his DNA at this point.
Yes.
What happens then? Steve grows up, says, no thanks to religion. I'm a good person. I don't need your mumbo jumbo organized stuff. And then he goes and tries to teach morality to his children. Yeah. And those children teach it to their children, so on.
Yep.
Morality without a firm rooting in something objective it starts to dissipate over time.
Yeah, it's like, I think the best analogy for this is, and you brought up a lot. I want to go through it point by point. Can you be good without religion? And now we're talking about passing on moral values. If you pull the flower up from the roots, or the plant up from the roots, sure, it will survive a while. Might survive one generation, might even make it to two. But eventually, without without the soil, without the foundation, like you said, which instilled those moral values to begin with, without having that objective grounding for something like a Catholic or Christian moral system, of course it's going to become dilute, and it might even completely dissipate in many regards. It's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. Is it going to happen in the first generation or the second? And you see it happening in culture now. You've seen it happen through societies over and over again. And then what do? Then they actually tend to return to the foundations when these things happen. But it is very interesting in a sort of more immediate sense with the families, because it's exactly what you described. It starts with somebody thinking, look, I'm a good person. I don't need religion to do it. So maybe we start there and then get the problems with that, because that's a false statement. You do need religion, and people get very upset when I say this. They get very upset, especially the atheists. They get very upset, but that's okay. A lot of people get upset over a lot of things these days. You just got to say it anyways. You cannot be a good person without religion. Now, at first, I used to answer this as a kind of yes, but now it's just a hard no. You can't be. You cannot be. And I will explain why right now. Shall I explain why?
Please.
Okay. So first off, and we did talk about morality before, how if you do not have God, if you do not have a designer between all there is to say that this is the way things are supposed to be, then we are left with just the fact of what is. But if we only have what is, not what is supposed to be, we have no objective standard of goodness to begin with. We have no objective foundation for morality. So if you're saying that God doesn't exist, then you've just gotten rid of all possible foundations for morality at all. Right? To say that something is good or bad or right or wrong, you just can't say that anymore, because at this point you just have you're left with relativism. All right. So if you want to be able to say that some things are truly good, some things are wrong, and that some things are better than others, then you need some type of transcendent anchor point. You need something like a religious worldview to get this working. Now, it just so happens that the religious worldview is the right one, even more specifically Christianity, even more specifically Catholicism. But I'd be willing to concede for the first part of the argument that you could just have a sort of general theism to get objective morality going. Now, for people who are listening, when we say that something is objective, we mean that something is valid and binding, independent of anyone thinking about it. Right? So when I'm looking at the sun, we say that's an objective reality, meaning the sun is not dependent on me thinking about it for its existence. It's there, whether I'm here or I'm not, whether you're there or not. It's there. It's an instantiated thing. It's an actually existing object. The opposite of objective, in one sense, is subjective. When we say that something is subjective, we mean it's a personal or private experience. Now, all experience is subjective. Right, and we're getting a little philosophical here, so slow me down if need be. So I have a subjective experience of the sun. You don't experience the sun the same way I do it.
I don't like the sun, and you do.
It's my experience, right? But I'm having a subjective experience of an actual object, right? I'm having experience of something that really exists. Now, I can also have a subjective experience of something that doesn't exist. Maybe I decide to experiment with some of the stuff under the sink. And I start seeing all kinds of things, elephants, zebras in the house. And I say,
imagining you rummaging under the sink.
I say, Christine, what's going on? Well, who let all these animals into the house? And we have 5 or 6 friends over. They would say rightfully that I'm hallucinating. So that would be a purely subjective experience. I am having an experience of something that does not actually exist. It's purely a fantasy of the mind. I'm glad you're getting a kick out of that.
I'm still laughing.
Now, here's what I'm saying. Without God, with transcendent anchor point, that morality cannot be objective if it is reduced to purely subjective. We would have to say it is nothing more than a useful but untrue belief that evolution helped to invent. Now, with God, we can say that evolution helped us to discover morality, not invent it. And these are key, crucial differences. And, most people aren't going to need to have this level of philosophical debate with the atheists, but these things are important. You cannot have objective morality, meaning moral values and duties that are valid and binding regardless of whoever thinks about it, meaning what the Nazis did was wrong, even if most of them thought it was right, because morality is not based on opinion. Values are grounded in God's essentially good character, and duties or obligations are extensions of God's commandments or will. So that's the first part. If you say that God doesn't exist, there's no even such thing as a good person to begin with. So you can't say I'm a good person. Well, that's a meaningless statement on an atheistic worldview. It's
because there isn't good or bad.
There isn't. It's just it's a figment of the mind. It's a socio-biological evolutionary illusion at best.
Let me tell you something. If you think about that viewpoint long enough and you start to believe it, you go a little bit insane, which is where we were coming from before we were Catholic.
Yeah, and God did a really good job of making you feel uncomfortable when you're in a nutty position. He knows how to agitate you back to the truth. Truth has a good feeling to it. That's one thing that I've learned. Not everything that has a good feeling is true, but when you come into something that is true, it doesn't rebel against you and all your intuitions like some of these other thoughts do that are clearly false. Like when you think 2 + 2 = 5, it just doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? It isn't right, but it doesn't feel right either. Same thing when you think about morality being relative. Well, we know it's not right. We can give arguments for why morality is objective, but even on an intuitive sense, it just doesn't feel right. So that's the one part. But let's go a little bit one step further. Okay. Yes, God exists. I'm not an atheist, angry or otherwise. But I can still be a good person without believing in God or being religious. Well, now we have a problem because now we said that good and evil, right and wrong do exist. They are objective, but you haven't really taken the time to figure out what those things are. You just assume, most of the people saying this anyways, well, what is a good person? Well, I don't kill people. I don't, I put a dollar in the Salvation Army bin every now and then. Oh, okay. Well, why do you donate 10% of your income to charity? Is that a good person? Like, what is the standard of goodness that you're going by here? Most people can never give a straight answer to that. But here's where the hard thing comes in. The hard thing comes in is once you admit that morality is grounded in God, you then got to figure out, okay, well, what does God want me to do? And it just so happens that there's this list of commandments. And it just so happens that the first of those commandments is to believe in God and to believe in the right God and only the right God. So as soon as you say that, okay, morality is grounded in God, but then you go and immediately violate the first commandment by saying, I don't need to believe in God to be a good person, or I can believe in any gods that I want to be good. Well, now you're a bad person by God's standard. So I don't know. You cannot escape this dilemma. You can't escape it as an atheist. You can't escape it as somebody who believes but wants to just subscribe to any religion. So sure.
Is that a universalist? Would we say that? Or just anybody believing in any religion?
Yeah, something, I think the best way to think about it is you can be good in a lot of ways on accident, right? Yes, and God put morality on our hearts. That's in the Bible. We have conscience, so we can figure out what is right and wrong in a lot of instances by just reflecting on our conscience. We have this moral intuition, but we also have revelation. And the revelation is really important as well because it can tell us things that we might not be able to figure out through deep armchair thinking, philosophy, or science, or any of those things otherwise. Even John Locke in his moral philosophy said, hey, we need to we can and should look at revelation. We should use reason to make sure it's the right revelation and good revelation. But we can't put revelation aside. So if you're an atheist, you're in trouble because then you got nothing. But if you're somewhat spiritual but not religious, then you're in trouble because there's very clear specific things that are in line with God, what wants us to do. And there are very other clear things that God does not want us to do. And we have an obligation through reason to figure out what those things are. So it's not enough to just define being a good person as not killing somebody or not being in jail currently. It's you have a moral obligation to figure out what your moral obligations are. You can't just say, well, I'm not in Eastern State Penitentiary right now, or I haven't, whatever, that you're just a good person. You have to go further than that. So we can start off on that foot.
That brief 8-minute monologue.
Mm-hmm.
So point one, you can't be a good person without God.
Oh.
Atheist or spiritual but not religious.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
Now, let's say you're spiritual but not religious, real quick, and you get just about everything right according to the Christian viewpoint, right? Just about everything right. but you still failed that first commandment, which Jesus, it's the first and holiest commandment.
And it's one, I would say, so Moses got the 10 commandments. Jesus came, he didn't give us 2 new commandments. They're not really 2 new commandments. They're a consolidation of the 10 into the most important 2.
Yeah.
Love God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, and love one another as you love yourselves.
Yeah.
And that really is the first 3 commandments. 1 through 3 deal with the first command that Jesus said. The second commandment that Jesus came and told us about deal with commandments 4 to 10, which if you were following along on my Catechism Fridays, we'd already talked about that a little bit. So these aren't new commandments. This is nothing new. He just said, yes, Moses got them right up on the mount. And now I'm telling it to you again. And it's almost as if, look, the 10 seemed like they were a little too much for you guys.
Here's
so we're going to boil them down. Yeah. 140 characters or less. Go.
And fair enough, right?
Still get them wrong.
And fair enough. So, to love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, implies you have to know who God is. You have to have the right God in mind to be able to fulfill that first commandment. So you have a moral obligation to get religion right, to be a religious person, but to be a religious person to the true religion. And that's a bold statement. I'm ready to take it to the mat.
So let's go.
The Catholic Church has taken to that mat for its entire existence. And I think it's right. They convinced me. They took me to the mat on that. So no, you again, if goodness is grounded and defined by God, you don't get to define goodness. You don't get to define it. If morality is objective, you don't just get to say I'm a good person because this is what I think is good.
Well, that's subjective.
That is not objective. Now, what you might think be good might be objective, but what have you done to establish that, right? And there's a couple ways we can get at it. I don't think you have to. There's ways to figure out morality. Obviously, the Catholic Church relies very much on revelation and the teachings of Jesus and tradition, but also has and has been a huge proponent of natural law theory of morality as well, which is very helpful for not only making sense of what is right and wrong, but also really good for anybody who wants to be able to defend various positions of Catholic morality that might not be directly in the Bible, such as contraception or things of that sort. So we might be skipping ahead a little bit here, but you wanted to focus.
Yeah, let's do another one on natural law.
Okay.
Because I think that's we could do a whole episode on this, correct? I'm sure you could. Mm-hmm. You could.
Series on natural law.
So let's come back to that one because that's very actually. Can you just give? I know I've heard you say one sentence about it before. Can you give like 1 or 2 sentences of what natural law is, just real quick? Yeah,
natural law is the way you think about this is God did design things in a certain way. Things have teleology, as we would say in philosophical jargon, right? They have ends or directedness. So what natural law tries to do is identify what are the ends of certain things. And when you understand what the ends of a certain thing is, you can understand what is really good for that thing. And then what becomes the good thing to do is to seek what is really good for the type of thing that thing is. Now that sounds a little redundant. I'll give an example. I know you wanted one sentence, but here. So a saw is for sawing. Go figure, right? So it is good for a saw to have sharp teeth and to actually saw wood. So it's good for a saw. It's not good for a saw to be used for pounding nails, for example. That's not morally bad because a saw is an artifact. We make it. A saw is not a moral agent. It's good for a triangle to have 3 straight sides that add up to 180 degrees. And to an extent that I draw a really bad triangle with not straight sides and imperfect angles, you would say that's a bad triangle. Now, that's not a matter of taste. That's an objective fact. When we understand what the essence of a triangle is, which is triangularity, we can say objectively that something that gets closer to that essence of having 3 straight sides and 180 degrees is a better triangle. This is what it means to be a triangle. Well, humans have such a thing too, right? We have reason. We're rational animals. That's a type of thing that we are. And the ends of reason is to seek the truth. The highest truth, of course, is to know God. And the truth about knowing God is to love God. That is our final cause, our final aim. So anything that supports that is good. That's in accordance with natural law. Anything that frustrates that would damage our coming to know and love God and coming to a relationship of God and aligning ourselves with God's will, any frustration of that is bad. And since we're moral agents, it then has a moral component in the way that, we don't think of squirrels that way or vultures, nasty things. But there's other things that we could think of too. So you are a free moral person. You have an end to know and love God. That is your highest end. Now, there's many other ends that are also good along the way, but that's your highest end. Now, for anybody to frustrate your end would be a bad moral. If I were to enslave you, that's bad. I'm frustrating what your natural end is. So we can say, this is why slavery is against natural law. It's impeding what God's plan is, what nature's teleology is for this human person, which is to be free, a free moral agent. Murder, obviously bad, and so on and so on. So we can draw this out, in many different ways, all the way down to sexual morality and then some. But that's kind of a working gist of it. The quickest summary I could say is, look, some things are really good for you, and other things aren't. And what you ought to do is pursue those things that are really good for you, which may or may not be the things that you want right now. You may want things that are really not good for you. And what natural law helps us to figure out is, what are those things that are really good for us? And it helps us figure it out without having to point directly to the Bible. Now, it does need God as its ultimate support. So we can think of natural law as a proximate means of morality, figuring out morality by just deep armchair thinking about our experience and existence alone. But ultimate morality, where it is ultimately grounded in God. So it's a rational enterprise for figuring out morality aside from Scripture, but that ultimately needs to be supported and grounded in the divine. And obviously the Catholic Church very much uses and helps support natural law. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas was arguably, along with him and Aristotle, the foundation of natural law theory. But the Catholic Church teaches it in conjunction with revelation, scripture, and tradition as well. So it's just kind of giving a brief overview of Catholic morality.
That was actually, for all of Catholic morality, that was pretty good. And just listening to you talk about this, it's hilarious and sad that you or I ever thought that the faithful were just kind of bumbling country bumpkins. Without any thought, like, lucky for them that they could be so naive to believe in God. And, and like, it is such a deep, rich philosophical mind that can be found in the Catholic tradition. It
is. The Catholic position and the Catholic tradition just is the intellectual tradition. Like, nothing comes close. Nothing compares to it. If you want the truth, then you just become a Catholic, and you will be able to. The easiest way to win any argument I found is just to be right. So just become Catholic, and it'll become a lot easier.
Oh, Lord. People who are listening to this, just imagine trying to argue with this man about day-to-day things around the house.
But,
pray for me.
even more, you said, like, atheism is not a natural position. You got to really condition yourself into it. That's the thing. Faith is a proper belief, and I've made this argument before. It's a proper and basic belief. It's a general and confused belief, as Aquinas would say. Like, most people aren't born with faith in the Trinity specifically, but everybody there's a belief that is occasioned in them at a very young age that things are teleological, that there's this sense of a divine design or transcendence thing. We all have this. So to get out of it really requires a lot of conditioning, and it's bad. We don't want to condition ourselves out of it. We want to refine it. We want to get more specific about it. We want to go from a general and confused knowledge of God to a specific and intimate knowledge of God. So that's important there. And so just because somebody assumes faith and doesn't go all the way down into the rich intellectual depths doesn't mean that they're wrong. So I think that's a very important. Just because you can't give arguments for all your positions doesn't mean that you're wrong. Somebody might give so I'm just trying to reaffirm anybody listening to this as a Catholic. You're right. Even if you don't know all the reasons why just yet, you are. And you can be confident that. And I think it's a worthy exercise and a very rewarding exercise to dive into that deep intellectual Catholic tradition. But I wouldn't want to make it seem like that's absolutely necessary. I think faith and belief in God is as basic and justified as believing in the external world or that people have other minds. They're not something. It's not something that needs to be argued for or that is inferred from other arguments, even though you can do that. It's something that is just perfectly rational to assume on its own, no matter what. And that's another discussion as well, as drawing that out.
I should take notes that I remember these.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you don't need to know all the exact reasons. And if you are bombarded by a non-believer at a dinner party and you have to say, you know what? So let me look at this stuff. I gotta look at my notes. Can I email you? Let's talk about this later. I'd like to continue this conversation. You don't have to have all the answers right away, but do know, even if you can't personally give the answers at that very moment, have the confidence that there are men and women who have come before us and that are currently doing the work. And they have figured out that all of this is perfectly rational and it is the right way to think.
Yeah, what I have found is that Christ really is the key to reality. He is what unlocks the intelligibility of the universe through and through, all the way to its core. So if you want to know everything about everything, and then you just got to become a Christian. And I would even push it further and say a Catholic. Now, you're not going to fully know everything about everything until you come to actually meet God face to face. But, you know, we've talked about this before. There's 5 questions that press upon everybody in life. Those 5 questions are origin, identity, meaning, morality, and destiny. Where do we come from? Who are we? Why are we here? How are we supposed to behave? And are we going anywhere after this? The only religion that can answer all these questions adequately, consistently, and well is the Christian religion, specifically Catholicism. And I've tried to shove a lot of worldviews through those 5 questions before. They just don't work. The worst is atheism. That just makes nonsense of everything. But, you know, and again, that would be another fine episode there, is try and see how the other, other religions fare up for these things. And I would encourage anybody to try and push it through. And what you will see is, the Catholic position is just the right one. It just answers these questions, all of them. It has an amazing and powerful synthesis, is what I've learned about Christianity and Catholicism, is it brings all these other areas of human knowledge, science, philosophy, everyday basic experience and common sense, brings them together, harmonizes them, and gives you that solid, complete grasp, satisfying grasp of the meaning of life that you're ultimately looking for. We got way off topic.
We did, but that's great. Wonderful stuff. And I can tell that you are now awake. I think we've woken you up from your almost bedtime stupor. I know. And now
got me worked up.
Yep. Now you're doing your deep armchair thinking in the armchair. Okay. So we talked about that you can't be a good person without religion ultimately, or without the right God.
That's going to upset people. That's okay. If you want to upset people, just put that on your Facebook stat and
watch the world burn.
Yeah, no. If you're going to make that claim, know how to argue that claim. I would say. But we're explaining it for mostly people here and for you, and especially giving reasons. Ultimately, what you're putting out, why passing on the faith, why having that tradition is so important. Not just so you can argue other people who aren't in that tradition, but so you can give the stability to those that you love. Right. Yeah.
Just look at the Catholic Church's example that they've set the past millennia and a half or so. They are very high in their standards, and they have never deviated from what they believe, from what she believes. The church does not deviate from what she believes, and yet still loving, respectful people going forth. So you don't have to be a jerk in telling everybody that you're right. That's the best way to win an argument is to be right, but at the same time, you don't want to be a jerk that nobody wants to talk to anymore either.
Yeah, and I think I'm not perfect with this. Sometimes I am this up front with people.
I don't know. I mean, the last person that said, we were with friends, and one of our friends said, no, I don't need religion to be a good person. I got this. And this person really got worked up about it. And we were very nice.
He got very upset.
Who did?
Which one are we talking about?
Okay, I can't say. I don't think I should say their name.
We'll just list the address then. we've had, as you can see, we've had this conversation multiple times with people.
Yeah, which one?
So there's a prudential value there, and remember, and this is something I have to remind myself when it comes to, and most of our friends, most of our associates, are not Catholic. So we constantly are dialoguing with people outside of the faith.
Are you going to think of the phrase about not winning arguments, saving souls?
Yeah, it's not about winning arguments, it's about saving souls ultimately, and that's what we need to remember. So you might have all the tricks in your bag to make a fool out of somebody, and that might feel good and that might feel right, but you have to remember, what is the purpose here? Am I here to just prove somebody wrong, or am I actually trying to convince somebody? And you can
bring them to the ultimate end, their teleology.
That's right. And you would be doing a bad thing, morally bad thing, I would argue, if you know that by just schooling somebody that you would then repel them from actually coming to accept the truth and coming to church. That would be a bad thing if you knew that and did that just to gratify your own ego for winning an argument.
Yeah.
So you really have to think about that. And when
keep your standards high.
Yeah.
Don't compromise your standards, but be compassionate.
And I'm going to be giving a talk to a group on apologetics, because you do need arguments. You will be challenged, and you do always want to have good reasons for why somebody should be a Christian and a Catholic. Absolutely. But how you present those arguments is really important. And one of the things I'm going to stress in my talk is that the best method of apologetics is forming a relationship, forming a friendship, to get people receptive to not just hearing about, but even better if they even just start to ask you in a kind of honest, curious, and open way about your faith, where then it doesn't even start off as a debate. If we can avoid the debate altogether, awesome. Find common ground somewhere else, form a friendship there, build bridges, and then you'll be able to propose and present rather than just have to argue for and debate. So there's some tactics and subtlety there when it comes to all this stuff. But again, another episode, veering way off course. We're just setting an outline for a book here.
I know. All right. So, you can't now. Let's talk about it from generations on. So, my own dad is a person who said, "I'm a good person. I don't need religion. I'm done with this." Now, this is coming from somebody who was raised very strictly Catholic for many years. And when he was in his 20s, realized that he could get away from it. He certainly did, and ran in the opposite direction. So he, in turn, along with both my parents, decided, we don't need religion. Let's focus on the family. I had a very happy childhood. I'm not saying that I was a terrible person. I didn't steal things, but I certainly lied. I was a very good liar. You know what? The trick to lying, I think this is maybe a George Costanza thing, is believe the lie. Didn't George Costanza say that on Seinfeld?
Yeah.
It's like, just believe the lie. So, the morality that my parents tried to raise me with is very good morality, but their morals are Catholic. They're Christian morals. Mm-hmm. You can't get away from that. So they tried to raise me with those morals that they said they didn't need anymore in the form of religion. Mm-hmm. The problem with that, and for me, was, what if I don't really care about what my parents think? Mm-hmm. I'm 17 years old. Well, my parents don't know me. I know better. I'm mm-hmm. young and fresh. They're just old fogies, crustaceans. So the commandment of honor thy father and mother. Well, man, I had a hard time with that for a number of years. Why should I? Why? Mm-hmm. What did they? So without the morality that they gave me, while it was rooted in a very objective moral sense from their Catholic upbringing, when they passed it on to me, it became subjective. This wasn't something that God told me to do. This was something my parents told me to do. Yeah. And what, if anything, do teenagers like to do, but do the opposite of what their parents tell them to do? Mm-hmm. So go ahead. I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
It's just classic relativism, where people think that morals just, can change with culture and time. And the problem with that is when you press that, when you realize that if morals are relative, they're just contingent on culture or time, then they don't really exist at all. You lose any sense in saying that, for example, that if morality is based on culture, and that every country or culture gets to define its morality, then who are you to say that what Nazi Germany did was wrong? You can't say it. So relativism doesn't work. It's absurd. It's self-defeating, and nobody who's a relativist will admit these unfortunate ends that relativism drives them to. So you realize it's really just people trying to be convenient with morality is what
Absolutely.
it is.
It's a lazy man's.
It's a lazy man's morality. You think, well, that was just kind of, last generation, but this generation. And look, certain customs change for sure, but it's really mostly people just getting away from what is right or moving into what is right or having a better idea of the moral facts. So when we say that morality is objective, drawing things in the sky again with my hand here. When we say that morality is objective, we don't mean that everything is moral absolute. We don't mean that lying is always right or wrong. We can think of instances where you might lie to somebody to save a life. For example, let's go back to Nazi Germany, since that's the example of the day. Somebody might be knocking your house saying, hey, does so-and-so live here? We want to bring them down to the old camp. And I think most any morally decent person would be like, no, go away. This person does not live here. So look, God understands context, right? Like some things are relative with a small r sense, but they're still objective, meaning what you did in that situation was the truly right thing to do. So you can't confuse these terms of relative with a big R sense means that morality is totally dependent on culture or a time period or something like that, which is absurd nonsense. Morality relative with a small r means that there's a really and truly good and bad, right and wrong things, but what those things are might depend on the situation you're in, for example.
Well, I tell you, the big R relative, it also coupled with the small r. I mean, I personally
really just having a buffet of
relativism.
I'll take this. And that.
Whatever was convenient. Well, you know what? And it's interesting.
We can add a third R into that too, which is called rationalization.
Ooh, I was so good at that.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that. Oh my God, one of my favorite.
This
activities.
is why this is good, but this is why this isn't really that bad.
Which
just goes to show how objective morality really is and how pressing it is, because we know when we're doing wrong and we can't escape it. So that's when we try to rationalize away.
I'll only do it this once. It's only because that person angered me. They don't really deserve my best, so I'm going to give them this instead. So yeah, man. Wow. What a mess. Yeah. What a mess. And so without that objective rooting, you can't have it. So yeah, you have, say, I'm not going to blame baby boomers, but it was, this me generation. They kind of rebuffed the religious upbringings that they had. It was old timers. They were too square, whatever. And then they try to pass. So they raised initially in an objective moral state. They then later, after having those objective morals really steeped in them and have the capacity to understand what truly is good and evil, they try to say, no, thanks. We're good from here on out. That's fine for them because they can always go back to their initial upbringing and education. Who suffers are the following generations.
Yeah.
Because then they're given a very fluid sense of it. It's, kind of like you're a grown up. You understand how to run a house. So you then suddenly would think like, hey, my toddler, he's pretty good. It's good. He can handle it. And you leave thinking that you all you do is project your ability to reason and understand these values onto somebody who has no basis in it.
Yeah.
It's not good. Yeah, clearly it's not good because we're just struggling with this relativistic nonsense.
Yeah, and again, the relativist is absurd. We'll do a whole thing on relativism because if somebody's like, well, it just all depends on culture or society. Well, you wouldn't agree with that if culture or society took a turn to say values that were inconvenient for you, like let's say right back to the strict Catholic moral values. Suddenly, it wouldn't be so relative for you anymore. That's right, because it's not convenient for you. You're just going on a convenience-based morality, not what is actually right.
And we are a convenience-based generation anyway, or not even just the millennial. I don't want to say that millennials, that they're the fault of all this, because millennials get a bad rap.
Yeah. Rightly
so in a lot of cases. This is just a convenience-based time period that we are in worldwide. So of course convenience-based morality is going to have an uptick.
And so much of the problems with millennials results from the problems with millennials' parents, when so much of that results from exactly what we're talking about right now. So yeah, I mean, there's much responsibility millennials need to take. I am one, but certainly there's explanations for why they're in the sort of situation that they are now. They lacked those traditional, correct moral values that previous generations at least got exposed to, even if they weren't thoroughly educated in them as they were in previous years. But I think it is very important to realize that if you're doing morality right, it's always going to demand something from you. It's never going to be convenient, right? Because what is really good for you, the types of things that cause you to flourish, often are at odds with immediate gratifications. They often are. I mean, take some simple examples: exercise and watching what you eat. We all know it is really good for us. It is better for us to be mindful of what we eat more healthy foods and less than to just be a blind hog at the trough all day. But we might want to be that latter app. So this is an example of what we want. What is convenient for us is really not good for us. Well, I mean, we can extend this to a million different other examples. So if you're not being challenged by morality, chances are you're not really working at it, or you don't really have it right. It was extremely challenging. I know we've talked about this before, becoming Catholic, because even though we had our idea of trying to live good, but the Catholic faith sets morality right. And when that happens, turns out, oh my goodness, I am a sinner. I got some work to do, right? There's some changes that need to be made. And when I say that not all morality is absolutes, some are absolutes. The first commandment is an absolute. You're to love God with all your heart. Like that isn't contingent on anything. You're expected to take that to death if need be. That is an absolute. But even beyond that, so much of morality, and it should make demands on you, and you should want that, and you should expect that, because that's going to cause you to flourish. And that's the way to think of morality. It's not an arbitrary set of rules. And this is what I was teaching my Sunday school kids today. God wants what is really good for us. He wants us to be happy. He knows us a million infinite times better than we know ourselves. He knows what's good for us. We don't always know what's good for us. We have to trust God that the instructions he's given us, the revelation he's given us, these moral laws that he's given us, these commandments he's given us, are really blueprints for getting the most out of the types of creatures we are, for being as happy as we possibly can. Now, that takes work, takes adjustment, takes sacrifice. Cardinal virtues, theological virtues, 10 Commandments, Beatitudes, all that is work. So I think that's a good litmus test right away. If somebody's not being challenged by morality, they're either not really trying to live it, or they don't got it right. So when somebody says, "Oh, the Catholic morality, it's so hard. It's it's difficult." The answer is yes. It is difficult.
This is training for the next life. You better believe it's difficult. It is
a very high standard. And one thing you'll know about the Catholic faith is that it is extremely high in its standard, but it's also extremely high in its mercy and forgiveness. And it's that beautiful balance that allows us to take responsibility for ourselves, to shape the type of character that we are supposed to shape, that will make us receptive to that perfect happiness and communion with God in heaven. That's what morality is there for. We're learning things. We're building virtues. We're becoming good people. But also, it gives us the grace to sustain us, and the forgiveness to say, hey, when we mess up, which we always will, to lift us back up, to not carry on with any unnecessary guilt or things like that. So it's a perfect system. It's the right system, but it's a challenging one. Amen. So I would say amen.
If you are a person who has been out of the faith or isn't yet Catholic, I encourage you to look at adult faith formations at your local parish, Catholic parish, or RCIA, Rites of Christian Initiation for Adults. Mm-hmm. Get in there, learn more about why the Catholic Church teaches what it does. It'll help bolster your faith and also your arguments should you be in the position where you have to argue and defend your faith to others. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think it's important to understand that this intellectual position goes all the way through. So when you hear the hard sayings of Catholic moral teaching or social teaching or sexual teaching, anything from contraception to what properly ordered sexual relationships are, and so on and so forth. That just is the right position. That is the consistent position, and you should study that. And perhaps we should do some episodes on those as well, on the tougher ones, and show how these extend inevitably from specifically natural law theory. And an understanding of natural law will help you to really make sense of why the church teaches what it teaches, and why these are the things to do if you want to flourish, and these are the things to avoid. And the Catechism has got it right.
Read the Catechism. If nothing else, have the Catechism bedside, tucked away in your glove compartment or your purse, and read it ad infinitum.
And gift it.
Gift it.
Like, whenever somebody's got a birthday, Catechism. If there's Christmas, holidays, Catechism.
This is reminding me because the episode that I just did, which is this one will come up after it, about parenting resources. My top parenting resource, the Catholic Catechism. I forgot to say that in that last episode. That's another great parenting, because parenting is just full of questions. What am I supposed to do? And if you want to have that strong moral compass, which we need, in Catholic Catechism.
60th anniversary Catechism.
Really? All right. I do appreciate about the Catechism, which is great for a busy person such as myself. It is in such a perfect little sound bite, a sentence, a couple sentences, a short paragraph. You can just open it up and get some really nice nuggets out of there without having to dive into something really deep and theological. But it is deep and theological, but you can just read it in,
It's a real page turner.
It is a page turner. I really enjoy it. And Mother Angelica, since we started with Mother, let's end with Mother. Mother Angelica always said, read the Catechism. Read the Gospels, read the Bible, read the Catechism.
Amen.
Amen. God bless Mother. All right. Thank you guys for listening. All these episodes that Pat and I have decided that we will record, that we went off on tangents. We'll do that at some point. If you will come back on, husband, will you come back on?
I will.
Are you going to give up your show?
If people continue to leave such sweet reviews.
Yes, please leave a review. Like Pat said at the beginning of the podcast, if you don't understand, you might not know it, but the more reviews a podcast gets, the higher up it'll show in the search results. So more reviews mean more eyeballs, and we love doing this because we have become believers, true believers in the Catholic faith, and we just want, it's not about winning argument. We're trying to save souls here. So help us spread this little ministry just by leaving a review. Take a couple seconds. Thank you. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared-down but not talked-down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.